Cole broke his leg on a Tuesday, and by Thursday I was sharing the cab of my box truck with the one woman at the whole wedding everybody had warned me about. 2 weeks, the entire width of Tennessee, a cargo hold full of rented arbors, borrowed chairs, and a welded altar that weighed more than my first car, and Del Monroe in the passenger seat with her boots on my dashboard, and a look that said she'd rather be riding in the trailer with the freight. My name is Wes Kimball. I was 34 years old, and I owned exactly one truck. 16 feet of white box on a diesel chassis, Kimball moving lettered on both sides by a guy who charged me extra for the second B because he said it was load-bearing. One truck, one man, one aching lower back, and a reputation in 3 counties for showing up when I said I would and not scratching the good furniture. It was not a life anybody dreams about at 8 years old, but it was mine, paid for, and it did not ask me to move to a city I couldn't afford to want. That last part is the whole story of why I was single, so I'll get it out of the way. Her name was Renata. We were engaged 14 months, and she wanted Nashville the way some people want oxygen. Not Nashville the place, Nashville the idea. Bigger, louder, a life where you were always about to run into somebody important. I wanted a gravel lot, a good truck, and quiet. There was no villain. Nobody cheated. She just packed for a life I couldn't picture myself standing inside of, and I let her go because holding on would have been a kind of lie. People kept telling me I must be bitter. I wasn't bitter. I was tired, which is a different and less interesting thing, and it doesn't make for good stories at parties. Cole Adler had been my best friend since we were 9 years old, and he traded me a pocket knife for a frog. He got the better end of that deal, and he'd been getting the better end of every deal since, mostly because he was the kind of man rooms rearranged themselves around. Big laugh, big hands, a general contractor who could talk a homeowner out of a bad idea and into a bigger budget in the same breath. When he called me and said he was marrying Shelby Monroe, I said congratulations, and when he asked me to be his best man, I said it was about time, and when he said the wedding was going to be a small thing out at the Monroe family's place with a homemade altar and a barn, I said good, because I had hauled enough rented ballroom chandeliers to know that the small homemade weddings were the ones people actually remembered. I met the Monroe family at the engagement party, which is where this really starts. It was held in the equipment yard behind Monroe Fence and Gate, string lights run off a generator, folding tables, a smoker going, the smell of cut steel underneath everything because you cannot weld for 40 years on a piece of land and ever get the smell of it back out. Shelby Monroe was warm and quick and the kind of pretty that made you understand exactly why Cole had lost his mind. She hugged me before I got my name all the way out. And then there was her sister. You always hear about her before you see her. Somebody leans in at the cooler and says, "That's Dallas, Shelby's older sister, don't mind her," in the voice people use for weather and difficult relatives. Somebody else says she runs the shop now, welds better than their daddy did, God rest him, but she'll take your head off. Somebody's aunt tells you not to try to set her up with anybody because she scares men off, says it like it's a fact about the woman and not a fact about the men. By the time I actually saw Del Monroe, leaning against a rack of gate panels with a can in her hand and an expression like she was pricing the crowd, I'd been briefed on her the way you brief a man on a storm system. She was 38, tall, built like she moved iron for a living because she did, forearms marked up with the little pale scars welders collect, dark hair shoved up under a cap that said nothing on it. She wasn't smiling. She didn't smile at her own sister's engagement party, which the crowd had clearly decided was a character flaw, and I would later understand was closer to a survival strategy. She caught me looking and did not look away, which most people do. She just held it, flat, until I was the one who broke. The trouble arrived with the toasts. And it arrived wearing Cole's face, because Cole, after 2 beers, thought he was a wedding MC. He stood up on a cooler, which is never the start of wisdom, and he went around the party pointing at people and handing out jobs. "You're on flowers. You're on the tent. You're doing the music. And if there's line dancing, I'm suing." Everybody laughed. He was good at this, at being the warm center of a thing. Then he pointed the beer at me, and then he swung it over and pointed it at Del, and he grinned the grin that had gotten him out of 100 consequences. "And these two," he said, "my best man and my favorite grump, they can handle logistics. The leftovers, right? The two that nobody's slow dancing with. Y'all can go pick up all the junk and haul it around. Perfect. Assigned." The room did the thing rooms do. That little dip, that hum, that turning of 40 faces to see how the two leftovers were going to take, being called leftovers out loud. I felt the old familiar heat go up the back of my neck, the one from being the guy whose fiancée wanted a bigger city, the guy who got left in the small, quiet place. I was gathering up something polite and deflecting to say. Dell got there first. She looked at Cole, then she looked at me, slow, top to bottom, the way you look at a truck you're thinking about buying and have already decided against. And she said, loud enough to carry, dry as a gravel road in August, careful. People fall for me by accident. The party laughed. Big laugh, relieved laugh, the laugh of people glad the tension had a place to go. She'd turned herself into the joke before anybody else could, taken the thing they were all thinking and said it first and meaner, so it belonged to her instead of to them. And even then, before I knew a single true thing about her, I thought, that is a person who has been laughed at before and learned to hold the match herself. So I didn't laugh. I set my drink down on the folding table, and in the little space after the laugh, while she was still standing there armored up and waiting for me to either flinch or fire back, I said, good. She blinked. One blink. It was the first thing I'd done that she hadn't already predicted. I'd rather haul with somebody who tells the truth, I said, than dance with somebody who won't. The party didn't know what to do with that. It wasn't a comeback. It wasn't me getting my dignity back at her expense, which is what they were braced for. It just sat there, sincere, in the middle of the string lights, being awkward and true. Cole said something to break it up, and the music came back on, and the moment closed over like water. But Dell was looking at me differently now, not warmer. If anything, more careful, the way you get more careful around a tool that turned out to be sharper than it looked. She lifted her can an inch off her hip, a toast so small only I could see it, and she said, quiet, just for me, don't do that. Do what? Be decent at me. I don't have a slot for it. Then she pushed off the gate rack and went to go stand somewhere I wasn't, and I told myself that was that, a strange woman at a party, an assignment that was really a joke. Nobody was actually going to make the two leftovers haul anything. It was a bit. It would evaporate by morning like all of Cole's cooler-top decrees. Then, 2 days later, Cole fell off a scaffold on a job site in Cleveland, Tennessee, and shattered his tibia in a way the surgeon described using the word comminuted, which I had to look up and wish I hadn't. Plate, screws, a boot to the knee, no wait for 6 weeks. The wedding was in 14 days. And every single piece of it, the arbors rented from a place 2 hours north, the 200 folding chairs a church in Sparta was lending, and the altar Dell had been welding by hand for a month, was scattered across the state and needed to be in one barn by Saturday. Cole called me from his hospital bed high as a kite and said, Wes, buddy, the assignment. It's real now. I'm so sorry. It's real. I said I'd handle it. He said, you and Dell. I said I'd heard him the first time. There was a pause, and then Cole said, in a floating painkiller voice, a thing I would not understand the weight of for another 12 days, she's gonna kill me. Oh man, she's gonna actually kill me. I figured he meant the driving. Dell was already standing in the shop lot when I pulled in at 6 the next morning, which told me she was the kind of person who was early to things she dreaded, so the dread had less time to grow. She had a travel mug in her hand and a rolled foam pad and a duffel by her boot, like she'd packed for a deployment. It was raining, of course. It rains in East Tennessee the way it breathes, without announcing itself, a soft gray that beads up on cut steel and makes the whole world smell like a coin held too long in a hand. She looked at the truck, she looked at me, she said, you washed it. I had washed it. I don't know why I told her the truth about that. Long trip, I said. Didn't want to look at road film for 2 weeks? It's gonna be filthy by Sparta. I know. Then why? Because right now it's clean, I said, and right now is the part I can do something about. She stared at me for a second, like I'd said something in a language she almost spoke. Then she threw her duffel up into the cab hard enough to make a point, climbed in, put her boots on my dash, and said, radio's mine or I walk. That was the first rule. There would be several. Dell negotiated the terms of a shared space the way other people breathe, constantly, and without noticing she was doing it. The radio was hers. The heat was hers because she ran cold, which I'd learn was a lie she told about her hands so she wouldn't have to explain the scars. The passenger window was hers, cracked 2 inches in any weather because she didn't like a cab that felt sealed. I got the driving, the map, and a dashboard she'd already claimed with her boots. A bad deal on paper, I took it. You do not win a load by fighting the first strap. You let it settle. You find out how it wants to sit. We drove north out of the valley with the wipers going and the radio playing whatever Dell wanted, which was a classic country station out of Chattanooga, and when that faded 40 minutes of her chasing signal through the mountains with the flat of one thumb, refusing on principle to let it be quiet. Dell did not do quiet. Quiet was where the questions lived, and she was not answering questions. She thought I braked too early. I thought she had opinions about a truck she wasn't driving. She thought the whole rented arbor situation was, and I'm quoting, a scam invented by people who've never had to store an arbor. She had a point there, honestly. Somewhere around the Cumberland Plateau, she informed me the reason I was a bachelor was probably that I drove like a man waiting for permission, and I told her the reason nobody set her up was probably that she led with the headbutt and she went quiet for exactly 1 mile. And then she said, fair, and turned the radio up, and I understood that we had just become, against both our wills, a little bit friends. We stopped for breakfast outside Crossville at a diner that had the good sense to look exactly like a diner. Cracked vinyl booths the color of old mustard, a pie case that hummed, a waitress named Reba who called us both Han, with the authority of a woman who had earned it. Dell slid into the booth across from me and picked up the laminated menu and read it like she was checking it for structural defects. Reba came with the coffee pot and 2 mugs, and here's a small thing that I did not know at the time was going to matter for the rest of my life. They didn't match. One was a plain white diner mug, chipped at the lip, the kind that has outlived 3 owners. The other was a garish orange thing, with Sea Rock City stamped around it in yellow letters and a cartoon rooster that had faded to a ghost. Reba set them down without looking, one in front of each of us, the luck of the draw, the white one landing at my hand and the ugly rooster one landing at Dell's. Dell looked at the Sea Rock City mug. Then she looked at my plain white one. Then, without a word, she reached across the table and switched them. That one's uglier, she said, taking the rooster for herself. I'll take the ugly one. You look like a man who needs things to match. I really don't, I said. You washed a box truck to drive it through mud. I didn't have a comeback, because she was right, so I let her have the rooster mug and drank out of the chipped white one, and Reba filled us both up twice, and it was, if I'm honest, the best I'd felt at a breakfast table in about 2 years. Dell ate like a person who worked with her body, fast and total, and in between, she told me the plan in clipped sentences, because underneath all the headbutting, she had the whole 2 weeks mapped in her skull down to the mile. Arbors first, up near Kentucky, a rental barn. Then back down for the church chairs in Sparta on Thursday. The altar pieces last out of her own shop, because those she wasn't trusting to the front of the trip where they could get banged around. Those rode careful. Those rode last. You built the altar yourself, I said. It wasn't a question, I'd seen the shop. Shelby asked me to. She said it flat, but something moved under it, quick, and was gone. It's an arch, steel, I don't do fussy, but it'll hold up in weather and it won't blow over, which is more than you can say for the rented junk. I'd like to see it. You will. You're gonna carry it. She drank off the rooster mug and set it down. That's your whole job, by the way, in case Cole didn't spell it out through the drugs. I know where everything goes and how it comes apart. You're the back. You lift, I aim. You don't lift with your spine like an idiot, and you don't tell me I can't carry my end, because I've been carrying my end since I was 15 and I'll carry it in front of God and everybody. Okay, I said. She narrowed her eyes at how fast I'd agreed. People like Dell get suspicious of easy yeses. They've learned the yes usually has a catch stapled to the back of it. Okay, she said, testing it. You aim, I lift, I said. I've been the back my whole life. It's restful. Nobody expects the back to have opinions. And there it was, the first time, quick as a spark off a grinder and gone just as fast. Del Monroe smiled. Not the armored grin from the party. A real one, small, mostly at the corner of her mouth, there and then hidden behind the rooster mug like she'd caught herself doing something she'd promised not to. I looked back down at my eggs so I wouldn't spook it. But I'd seen it. And I spent the next 200 miles trying to earn it again. I did not earn it again for a while because Dell rationed those smiles like they cost her something, which I'd eventually learn they did. We got the arbors up near the Kentucky line, 4 white powder-coated things that came apart into a stack of poles and looked disassembled like the world's most disappointing tent. The rental guy, tried to charge a cleaning fee for mud that was going to be on them by Saturday anyway, and Dell had a conversation with him that started at fence shop volume and ended with him thanking her for her business. I loaded them into the front of the box, strapped, padded, light stuff up front where it belonged. Dell watched me strap and didn't say it was wrong, which from Dell was a standing ovation. We got the chairs Thursday out of a fellowship hall in Sparta, 200 brown metal folding chairs a church secretary named Miss Odell handed over on the honor system. That was the day I started noticing the wince. It happened when Dell picked up her stacks. She carried 10 chairs to a stack same as me, up the ramp into the box, but there was a hitch in it right at the top of the lift, a catch in her breath, and a tightening at the corner of her jaw, gone so fast you'd never see it if you weren't watching. I was watching, it's my whole trade, watching how weight moves through a body, where it hurts. Dell had a bad left shoulder, and she'd had it a long time, from the way she'd built her whole style of lifting around, not using it. She led with the right, she kept the left low, and every so often the load caught her wrong, and the wince got out before she could lock it down. I did not say anything. This was the hardest thing I did on the whole trip. Harder than the altar, harder than the overpass. Every instinct I have said carry more, so she carries less. But Dell had told me in the diner, in front of God and everybody, that she'd carry her end, and I wasn't to tell her she couldn't. And I understood that the cruelest thing I could do to a woman like Dell was to see her hurting and make it a headline, so I found other ways. I took the far stacks, so hers were a shorter walk. I carried 11 so the piles ran out on my side. I needed her to steady the ramp, which put her at the bottom where the lift was easier. I rearranged the whole job around a shoulder we were both pretending I didn't know about, and Dell, who missed nothing, knew exactly what I was doing, and let me do it, and never once said thank you, and that not saying was the loudest thanks I've ever gotten. We slept those first nights in the truck, which sounds worse than it was. Dell had her foam pad and I had a bedroll, and we'd park under the tall sodium lights where the asphalt went orange and shiny with rain, and she'd take the cab, and I'd stretch out in the back on a moving blanket between the strapped arbors, and we'd talk through the little sliding window in the bulkhead until one of us stopped answering. That window was where I learned her, a piece at a time, in the dark, which is the only way Dell would let herself be learned. Their daddy had run the shop until his heart quit at the welding table 4 years back, and Dell had been running it beside him since she was a teenager. So when he went, there was no question of who caught it. She caught it. Shelby was younger, softer, the one their mother had let stay soft, and Dell had never once resented it out loud, which is how I knew she'd resented it plenty. She'd had a serious thing once, a man who wanted her to sell the shop and move to Knoxville and be, in her words, a wife with a nice manicure who tells people her husband's in HVAC. She said no. He left. No villain there either, she said through the little window, in a voice that dared me to feel sorry for her. Just a man who wanted a smaller version of her than the one that existed. That's going around, I said. What is? Wanting the smaller version. And I told her about Renata and Nashville and the wedding that unpacked itself before it happened. I hadn't told the long version to anybody in a while. Dell listened through the window without interrupting, which I hadn't known she could do, and when I finished she was quiet a minute, and then she said, "So we're both people somebody tried to move to a city. Looks like. Difference is, you're sad about it and I'm not. I'm not sad about it. You wash trucks you're about to make dirty," she said. "You're a little sad about something." And she slid the window shut before I could argue, which was how Dell won every argument she was afraid of losing, and I lay back on the moving blanket and looked at the rain coming down orange through the truck stop lights and thought that she wasn't entirely wrong, and that it was a strange thing to be diagnosed by a woman through a hole in a truck. The spot welding happened at a rest stop outside Cookville on the 5th day. We'd stopped to eat gas station sandwiches at a concrete picnic table, and while we ate, Dell was frowning at the stack of folding chairs visible through the open roll door, and finally she got up and climbed in and came back out with one of them, and one of its legs was folded wrong, snapped clean at a weld. The whole chair sitting cockeyed and useless. Somebody had overstacked it or dropped it. Years ago I'd been riding around Miss Odell's fellowship hall broken ever since. Can't send a bride 200 chairs and one that dumps Aunt Carol on the floor, Dell said. She looked at the little welder she kept in a hard case, behind the seat, a battery job, Nothing like her shop rig, but enough for a spot repair. And then she looked at me, and I watched her decide something. "Come here," she said. "You're gonna do it." "I don't weld." "You lift and I aim, that's the deal, but the aim's easy here, so today you lift and you aim." She clamped the leg back true, handed me the stinger and a hood, and stood behind me close enough that I could feel her heat through my jacket, which for a woman who claimed to run cold was interesting. "It's not strength," she said low at my ear. "That's your whole problem. You think everything's strength. It's patience. You touch it, you count, you let it pool, you pull off before you burn through. Too gentle, you get a cold weld that looks fine and fails the first time it takes weight. You want it right in the middle. You want just enough." "Just enough," I said. "Just enough. Now strike your arc." I struck it. The hood went dark, and then the little sun bloomed at the tip of the rod, blue-white, and for a second I couldn't see anything but that and hear anything but Dell counting under her breath, 1, 2, 3, her hand light on my shoulder, steering, and I let it pool the way she said and pulled off, and when the hood cleared there was a bead there, ugly, mine, but holding. Dell looked at it. She flexed the leg with her boot. It held. "Huh," she said, "not terrible." High praise. It's the highest I got. She took the stinger back and cleaned up my ugly bead with a fast-passing touch of her own, and where hers went, the metal looked like it had grown that way. And I understood, watching her hand, that Del Monroe was an artist, that the fence shop and the Gruff and the Sea Rock City mug were all housing built around a person who could make cold iron look like it was liquid a second ago, and that almost nobody in her life had ever once called her that out loud. "You're good at this," I said. She didn't look up. "I'm the best in 3 counties and everybody knows it." "No," I said. "Not good like fast. Good like." I was reaching for it and it came out plain, which is how the true ones always come out for me. "Good like it's pretty. Your welds are pretty, Dell." Her hand stopped. She was quiet for a second too long, the stinger still hovering over the fixed leg, and when she started moving again, it was too brisk, and she said, "Don't," in the exact same voice she'd used at the party. "Be decent at me. I don't have a slot for it." She packed the little welder back into its case with more care than it needed, and she wouldn't look at me for about 20 miles, and I thought I'd stepped wrong, and I hadn't. I'd stepped exactly right. I just didn't understand yet that stepping right was the thing that scared her most. The truck broke down on the 8th day in the rain, under an overpass, on a stretch of 2 lanes south of Cookville, with no cell signal and no shoulder to speak of, which is exactly where trucks decide to break down, because trucks have a sense of drama. It wasn't serious. A belt let go, the temperature needle climbed, and I coasted us off under the concrete of an overpass just as the sky, which had been threatening all afternoon, finally quit threatening and came down in sheets. Real Tennessee rain, the kind that turns the world to noise, hammering on the box and sheeting off the edge of the overpass in a curtain so thick the road disappeared. I killed the engine and we sat there in the sudden loud dark of it, the two of us, dry under the concrete, the rain roaring 6 feet away on both sides like we'd parked inside a waterfall. "Belt," I said. "I've got a spare. I need it to cool down first or I'll burn my hands off." "How long?" "Half hour, 40 minutes. Dell looked out at the water coming down, and then she did something I didn't expect. She stopped negotiating. She pulled her knees up onto the seat, and she leaned her head back against the window, and she let the quiet come, the exact quiet she'd been holding off with the radio for 8 days straight. The radio was already dead with the engine. She didn't ask for it. She just let it be quiet, and the rain filled the quiet so it didn't have to be a question, and for a long while neither of us said anything at all. Then out of the water noise, not looking at me, Dell said, "This is nice." The breakdown. She made a small, frustrated gesture at all of it. The rain, the dark, the concrete overhead. "You can't get anywhere. Nobody can call. There's no list. There's nothing to run. I don't get a lot of nowhere. I run the shop. I run the books. I run Mama to her appointments. I ran Daddy's funeral. I'm running this wedding. There's always a somewhere I'm supposed to be getting us to." She turned her head and looked at me, and in the gray overpass light her face was younger and unguarded and about 10 years less tired. "I like nowhere. I didn't know I liked nowhere." "We can break down more," I said. "I offer it as a service." She almost laughed. I felt it move through her, the almost. She looked back out at the rain. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "And you don't make it a thing. I'm bad at making things. Ask anybody." You're the only person in about 4 years, Dell said, slow, to the windshield, who's carried my end without telling me I couldn't. She said it like it hurt, like she was passing me something sharp handle first. You noticed my shoulder. Don't lie. I watched you notice it in Sparta, and you didn't say a word. You fixed the whole job around it so I never had to admit it. Nobody does that. Everybody either makes me carry it to prove I'm not fragile, or takes it away to prove I am. You just made it easier and let me keep my dignity. I didn't know a person could do both. I sat with that. The rain roared. And I think the reason what I said next worked is that I didn't reach over, didn't say more. I just told her the true plain thing, which is all I've ever really had. That's not a favor, Dell, I said. That's just how you treat somebody, you. And I stopped, because the word coming was too big for the 8th day, and we both heard the shape of it in the space where I quit. The rain answered for me. Dell looked at her own hands, the pale scars on the backs of them, and she didn't finish it for me, and she didn't shut the window on it either. She just let it sit there, the biggest thing that had been in that cab the whole trip, and after a minute she said, "Rough, fix the belt, Kimball." And I did, once it cooled, out in the edge of the rain, and she held the light for me, and didn't tell me once I was doing it wrong, which was how I knew something between us had moved, and neither of us was going to say so. The twist, when it came the next morning, and it came in a cardboard box. We'd pulled into her shop to load the altar pieces, the last freight, the careful freight. Dell was in the office running down a checklist. She'd sent me up to the storage mezzanine for the padded blankets and the crate of hardware, and up there in the dust and the smell of flux wedged behind a shelf of gate hinges, I found a banker's box with the lid caved in and miscellaneous, Dallas written on the end in marker gone brown with age, shoved back there years ago and forgotten the way boxes do. I moved it to get at the blankets and the rotted bottom let go, and the guts of it spilled across the floor. I got down to gather it up before she came looking. Most of it was nothing: old shop receipts, a busted set of headphones, a lanyard from a trade show. But two things landed face up by my knee, and I picked them up, and the whole trip turned over in my hands like a truck going into a ditch in slow motion. The first was a photograph, not a phone picture, an actual print, the square glossy kind that comes out of a disposable camera, the color gone warm and orange the way those do after a decade in a box. It was a picture of me, younger, maybe 24, standing in the Monroe's equipment yard in the summer, laughing at something out of frame, a beer in my hand and no idea a camera was on me. I remembered that summer only in pieces. I'd dated a woman named Renee back then, Shelby's college roommate, for a handful of months that ended friendly and vague, and I'd been around the Monroe place a few times, because of her, cookouts, a birthday, the edges of a family I wasn't part of. I definitely didn't remember anyone taking my picture. Somebody had. Somebody had taken my picture 10 years ago, laughing in a yard, and kept the print. And on the back, in blocky welder's handwriting I'd been reading off truck stop checklists for 8 days, was written a date, that summer, and under it 2 words, pressed so hard into the paper the pen had nearly gone through. Don't. Idiot. The second thing was a CD, a burned one, a silver disc gone scratched and cloudy from being played, in a cracked jewel case, and taped to the front was a strip of masking tape with a track list in the same blocky hand. I read the songs. I didn't know all of them, but I knew enough to know what a list like that was, what it had always been, what it will always be, as long as there are people too scared to say a thing out loud and brave enough to say it in somebody else's words instead. It was a mix. It was the kind of mix you burn for one specific person and then never, ever give them. At the top of the tape, where you'd write who it was for, she'd written no name. She'd just written small. For the guy who won't notice. I sat on the floor of that mezzanine, with the rain starting up again on the metal roof, and I held a 10-year-old picture of myself and a mix I was never supposed to hear, and I understood, all at once and far too late, that the mean sister nobody set up because she scared men off had not been scaring off men in general. She'd been scaring off one. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough that my knees ached. Then I did the thing you do, the reflex, and I called Cole, because Cole had been there that summer. Cole knew. Cole had pointed a beer at the 2 of us at the party and called us leftovers and then said she's gonna kill me in a floating painkiller voice I hadn't understood. He was still on the good pills. That's the only reason I got the truth, and I'm not proud of how I got it, but I got it. Wheeze, buddy, how's the hauling? Cole. That summer Renee and I dated. Did Dell? I didn't even know how to ask it. Was there something with Dell? There was a long floating pause, and then Cole, honest as only a man on painkillers can be, said, "Aw, man, did you find out? Don't tell her you found out." And then, before I could stop him, the whole thing spilling loose. She made me swear, dude. Twice. Once when I asked you to be best man, she pulled me aside, said, "Whatever you do not stick me in a car with him. Do not put me at his table. I mean it, Cole." And then again when I did the cooler thing, the joke, assigning you two, she caught me after and she was quiet mad, which is the scary one, and she made me swear I'd fix it, put somebody else on logistics. Cole groaned, and then I fell off a scaffold and made it real. Oh man, she's gonna actually kill me. Why? I said. My voice came out strange. Why didn't she want to be near me? Because she's been gone on you since that summer. You absolute 2x4, Cole said, with the exasperated tenderness of a man who's watched this from the outside for a decade. Since you were 24 laughing in the yard dating the wrong girl. She figured it out and you never even looked, and she decided her words. She told Shelby once, and Shelby told me, she decided it hurt less to be the mean one than to be the one who wanted you and got nothing. So she got mean on purpose. She built the whole thing so nobody, especially you, would ever catch her wanting anything. Cole exhaled. Wes, do not tell her I told you. She will weld my other leg. I looked up from the phone. Dell was standing at the bottom of the mezzanine stairs. She'd come to find out what was taking so long. She was looking at the busted box and the picture in my hand and my face, and I watched her read the whole thing off me in about 1 second flat, because reading me was the one skill she'd been practicing in secret for 10 years. Hang up the phone, Wes, she said, very quiet, the scary quiet. I hung up the phone. For a second, neither of us moved. The rain came down harder on the mezzanine roof. I was still holding the photograph, the young laughing me, the don't. Idiot. Pressed into the back, and I did the worst possible thing, which was the tender thing. I stood up slow and held it out toward her, the way you'd hand back something that fell out of somebody's pocket, and I said her name, soft, Dell, and she came up the stairs and took it out of my hand, not gentle, and she took the CD too, and she held both of them against her chest with one forearm the way she'd held the wince in Sparta, locking it down before it could get out. That's old, she said. That's 100 years old. That's a box that should have gone to the dump. Dell? It doesn't mean anything. She was already backing down the stairs, already reaching for the checklist and the shop and the wedding and every somewhere she had to be getting us to. I was 28 and stupid, and it was a bad month. People make dumb tapes. Don't, and there it was, the third time, the same 2 words she'd been throwing at me since the string lights, except now I finally understood what they'd always meant. Don't be decent at me. Because if I was, she'd have to feel it, and if she felt it, 10 years of armor came off at once, and a person can't stand up under that in the middle of a workday with an altar to load. You asked Cole twice, I said. I didn't mean it as an accusation. It came out as one anyway, because I was hurt in a way I hadn't expected to be, hurt at all the days she'd spent in my truck knowing this and letting me not know it. You told him not to put us together. Twice. Yeah, well, she got to the bottom of the stairs. She wouldn't look at me. I got outvoted by a scaffold. Why didn't you? Because it's handled, Wes. Loud now, finally the fence shop volume, and I understood the volume was a mercy she was doing herself, because loud was a place she could stand and quiet wasn't. I handled it years ago. I decided I wasn't going to be another woman standing around waiting for you to notice her, and I've been fine, completely fine, and then my sister marries your best friend, and the whole universe shoves us in a truck for 2 weeks, and I was getting through it. I had a system, and you had to go be... Her voice cracked, one hairline crack, and she hammered it shut. You had to go be kind about my shoulder. You couldn't just be like every other man and make it about you. You had to notice. Do you know how much easier this would have been if you'd just been a jerk? Dell, I'm gonna ride back with the caterer, she said. It landed flat in the middle of the shop. What? Marcy, the caterer. She's driving down Friday. She's got room. She offered. She was already lying. I could hear the seams in it. Marcy had offered nothing. Marcy was a woman she'd invented in the last 4 seconds because a woman like Dell can build an exit out of anything the way she can build a gate out of scrap. You don't need me for the altar unload. It's just muscle at that point. I'll draw you a diagram of how the arch goes together. You take the truck. I'll ride with Marcy. It's cleaner. Cleaner, I said. Cleaner, she said, And she meant it the way you mean a word you're using to cover a wound, and she turned and walked into the office and shut the door, and that was the end of the part where we were, against both our wills, a little bit friends. We loaded the altar that afternoon, barely speaking. She aimed. I lifted. It came apart into an arch in two curved halves, and a heavy-footed base and a crossbar she'd worked a pattern into, leaves or vines, something that must have taken her nights, and I carried every piece and she guided every piece, and neither of us said one word that wasn't about the freight. Careful of the finish. Blanket under it, strap it low. It rode last, the careful freight, exactly like she'd planned back in the diner 100 years ago, back when the worst thing between us was a rooster mug. We drove the last leg toward the reception hall, in a silence that was nothing like the good silence under the overpass. This one had walls in it. Dell rode with her boots off my dash, arms crossed, looking out at the wet asphalt going by orange under the truck stop signs, and I did the thing I'm least proud of in the whole telling. I let it get quiet and kept it quiet. We stopped once for gas and coffee, and I got mine, and I didn't get hers. For 8 days I'd filled her cup without being asked. 2 coffees, always 2, and now I got one, and I watched her see the empty place where the second cup used to be. I told myself I was giving her space, and I knew I was punishing her for the crime of having wanted me quietly for 10 years, which is about the stupidest thing a man ever punished a woman for. But I was scared. I'd been the last man to figure out what a woman felt before, and here was proof I'd missed it again. Missed it for a decade this time. And the fear in me said better to go quiet than to get it wrong out loud one more time. So the truck went quiet, and it stayed quiet all the way to a loading dock behind a reception hall in the rain, with a welded altar in the back that neither one of us had said the true thing under. The reception hall was a converted feed store with a covered loading dock out back, and by the time we got there, the rain had gone from serious to biblical. It came off the dock roof in a solid sheet, the same waterfall we'd sat behind under the overpass, except this time there was nothing good in the quiet, just the two of us and the running water, and a truck full of the last freight. I backed up to the dock. I killed the engine, and Dell reached for the door handle to go find her invented caterer and her clean exit, and I said, "Dell, don't go ride with a woman who doesn't exist." Her hand stopped on the handle. "There's no Marcy," I said. "You built her out of scrap so you'd have somewhere to be. You do that. I've watched you do it for 2 weeks. Somebody gets too close and you build an exit out of whatever's lying around." The rain roared. "You don't have to, but if you're gonna go, go for a real reason, not a made-up woman in a real car." For a long moment she didn't move, hand on the handle, staring straight out at the water coming down, and then she let go of the handle, and she turned in the seat and looked at me, and the armor was just gone. Not off, gone. Like it had never been anything but paint over something that had been standing there, raw the whole time. "You want a real reason?" Her voice was low and it shook and she let it shake, which for Del Monroe was the bravest thing I ever watched a person do. "Fine, I've been mean to you since I was 28, Wes. On purpose. Every time you've been in a room with me, I've been mean the second you walked in, and I did it because nice would have told on me. That's the whole thing. I look at you nice for 1 second and everybody knows, and and then I'm just another woman standing in a yard, hoping you'll turn your head, and I would rather you think I hate you than have you know the truth and not want it back. Mean was safe. Mean I could survive. So I built a whole self out of it, and it worked for 10 years. And then you washed a stupid truck you were about to make dirty and carried my end without telling on me, and it stopped working, and I've been sitting in your passenger seat for 2 weeks watching the one thing I built my armor to keep out walk right in the front. The rain came down. I have never in my life wanted to be careful and unhurried as bad as I did right then, and I was. "So tell on yourself," I said. She stared at me. "You've been telling on everybody but you for 10 years, I said. You told on the men who wanted the smaller version. You told on Cole. You told on that box in the attic. Tell on yourself. Say the nice thing. I'll still be sitting here when you're done. I'm the back, Dell. I don't go anywhere. I just hold the weight and wait for you to aim." And Dallas Monroe welder, best in 3 counties, the mean sister nobody set up, closed her eyes for a second, like she was striking an arc under the hood, 1, 2, 3, let it pool, and then she opened them, and she did the thing she'd sworn at 28 she would never do. She told on herself. She said it plain, the way I say things, like she'd caught it off me across 2 weeks and a diner and a rest stop and an overpass in the rain. I want you to stay, she said. Then harder, braver, claiming it the way she claimed the ugly mug, the way she claimed her end of every load. I'm staying in your truck. You hear me? Not for the wedding. The wedding's Saturday and it doesn't need us anymore. I'm staying in your truck for the drive after. For all of them. For the boring hauls to nowhere and the breakdowns under the overpasses and the diners with the ugly mugs. That's me telling on myself. You want the whole confession? Welder to freight? I fell for you by accident 10 years ago in a yard, and I've been fixing that mistake ever since, and I quit. I want the mistake. I reached across the cab, past the gear shift, past 10 years, and I put my busted rain-cold hand against the side of her face. Over the scar she got at 19, and she leaned into it hard the way she'd leaned into the quiet under the overpass, and I said the only true thing I had, which is the only kind of thing I've ever had. You didn't fall for me by accident, Dell, I said. You warned me about it the first night. Careful. People fall for me by accident, you told me at the party. I just didn't know you were telling on yourself. And I kissed her. I want to tell it right because it's the only one that matters. It wasn't fireworks because we weren't fireworks people. Either one of us. It was slow and sure, and it tasted like bad truck stop coffee and rain, and her hand came up and gripped the front of my jacket the way she gripped a load right before she lifted it. Total, committed, no half measures, and mine settled at the back of her neck under the cap, and the rain roared off the dock roof like it was covering for us, and 10 years of a woman being mean on purpose so nobody would catch her wanting anything came off all at once, and she didn't fall apart under it. She held. She's a welder. She knows exactly how much a thing can take before it fails, and she'd built herself to take this. When we broke apart, she kept her forehead against mine, breathing hard, and said, "Rough, if you tell Cole I cried I will weld your doors shut." And I said, "You're not crying," and she said, "I know I'm not," and she absolutely was. And I had the sense, for the first time in about 4 years, of a life I could picture myself standing inside of. We unloaded the altar together in the rain, the last freight, the careful freight. She aimed, I lifted. And this time when her shoulder caught her wrong at the top of the base, she just said, "Ow, hang on, my shoulder." Out loud, plain, no jaw lock, no hiding it. And let me take the weight a second while she reset, and then she took her end back. And I understood that this was the whole thing I'd wanted and hadn't had a word for. A person who'd let you make it easier and still carry her end. Both at once. She hadn't known a person could do both. Turned out neither of us had until we did. Shelby married Cole that Saturday under one of the rented white arbors because Dell's steel arch was, in her words, too good to waste on people who are already in love and don't need convincing. But she kept the arch. She stood it up in the corner of the yard where the light came in, and every so often that year I'd catch her out there looking at it, running a thumb along the pattern of leaves she'd worked into the crossbar on all those nights, before she had a reason to admit who she'd worked them for. We got married a year later, in the fall in that same equipment yard, string lights run off the same generator, the smell of cut steel under everything. We got married under her arch. She'd finally found the couple it was good enough for, she said, and that couple was us. Cole stood up for me on a leg that had healed crooked enough to ache before rain, so he always knew when it was coming, which made him insufferable. Shelby cried. Dell didn't, out loud, and I didn't tell on her. My box truck did the hauling, same as always, Kimball moving down both sides with the load-bearing second B, and the last thing it ever hauled as a work truck, before I bought a second one and turned it into just ours, was our own furniture, my stuff and her stuff, out of 2 half-empty places and into one full one. Light stuff up front, heavy stuff low. The careful things last. She aimed, I lifted. She carried her end, and I made it easier, and neither of those was a lie anymore. The disposable camera photo lives on our refrigerator now. The young laughing me, 24, no idea. I was being loved from across a yard by a woman with a camera and a scar and a whole decade of hard quiet ahead of her before she'd let herself say so. It should have gone to the dump 10 years ago, and it didn't, and now it hangs at eye level, held up by a magnet she cut and welded out of scrap in the shape of a little box truck, because Del Monroe does not buy a magnet when she can make one meaner and better. I flipped it over once to see if the back still said what I remembered. It did. Don't, idiot. She caught me reading it and didn't take it away. She just looked over my shoulder and said, I was right though. You were an idiot. And I said, took me 10 years and a broken leg that wasn't even mine. And she said, you got there, which from Dell is the whole cathedral. The scratched CD I finally got to hear. She put it in one night on the drive back from a job, no ceremony, just slid it in and dared me with her whole face to make it a thing. I didn't. I just drove and listened to 10-year-old songs a scared woman had picked for a man who wouldn't notice, and reached over at a red light and held her hand, the scarred one, and let the mix tell on both of us the way neither of us could back then. And the two mugs, the chipped white one and the Sea Rock City Rooster, ride in our kitchen cabinet now because I went back to that diner outside Crossville and bought them off Reba for $20, and a story she said was worth more than the mugs. Dell drinks out of the ugly one every single morning. She says somebody in this house has to take the ugly one, and it's not going to be the man who washed a truck he was about to make dirty. She says people fall for her by accident. I keep telling her it wasn't an accident. I keep telling her she aimed. What would you have done if the person everybody warned you about turned out to be the one who'd been carrying a quiet torch the whole time, hidden behind every sharp word? Have you ever found out somebody was mean to you on purpose because being honest would have cost them too much? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.